they're not very good looking bonds, right? I mean, paying 8%, the market wants 10%. So what are you going to do if the demand is low for a product? You're going to drop the price, right? So we have to compute, and you need to be able to do that, what the price of these bonds will be. So your financial calculators for that are great. So let's enter into the calculator. Payment equals 4,000, right? And equal to 6. Future value, equals 100,000. I equals, this stuff all comes from the timeline, right? So if we're okay with the timeline, n is equal to 6. Payment, which is the annuity that occurs, payment, PMT equals 4,000. Face value or future value is $100,000. Now we have to put an interest rate in, the interest rate that we want to use to compute the present value. Who is going through the process of computing the present value? The buyer, right? The buyer wants to figure out what am I willing to pay for this. The buyer is going to use which rate? The 10%, the rate that they're willing to pay, that they want to earn as a return on this investment. So on a semi-annual basis, that's 5%. So you need to put in the 5%. And then if you solve for the present value, what do you get?
Why 5%?
So 5% is half of the 10% yield. It is the investor, the bond holder, the people who are considering lending money that are setting the interest rate, right? It is the lender that sets the interest rate. So the market rate is 10%. That's what the lenders demand as a return on this investment. So the lenders are going to say, all right, this is what I'm going to get in the future from you. What is it worth to me today? Let me discount those future cash flows at my rate of 5% on a semi-annual basis.
94, 924, 31. I don't know if everyone got the same. I got 94. Probably pushed.
I got 94 too, but I don't remember.
94, 924.
94, 924.
4.31.
0.31?
Yeah, that's my answer. I don't
That's
know.
right.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
I know.
You look at my calculator.
I know. You just told me. How do you clear it? All right. So you really need to be able to use your calculator to do present value calculations. All right. So you enter the facts that you know, and then you solve for the present value. So the present value is less than the face value, which we reasoned it has to be, right? Which we reasoned it has to be because the effective rate, the market rate, the yield is greater than the stated rate. So why are these bonds issued at a discount? Because the effective rate is greater than the stated rate. All right, so if investors are willing to pay $94,924.31, then how much would Rooney borrow from that? All right, this is ultimately Rooney's attempt to borrow money. How much is he going to borrow?
94.
Exactly that amount, right? Exactly that amount. So the present value, exactly that amount. Now I'm going to use, because I have an amortization table here on the next page, in which I computed the present value using tables instead of the. So I'm going to use 94,924.76 instead. So Rooney is going to receive cash of $94,924.76. I'm gonna use that 76 instead of 31 because I wanna be consistent with the table.
Note payable will be 100.
So bonds
And
payable,
discount.
the credit to bonds payable will be for 100,000 for the face value, right?
And discount.
And so the difference of 5,075.24 is going to be debited to what?
To discount.
Discount on bonds payable, right?
Yeah.
We always record the liability for its face value, and then we use the valuation account discount or premium to adjust it to its carrying value. All right, and so the carrying value now, which is the same thing as book value is bonds payable minus discount, which is 100,000, minus 5,075.24. And that is 94,924.76. Okay? So what I want you to recognize is that the liability is recorded on the balance sheet, is recorded on the balance sheet at its present value. And I forgot to discuss this when I started at 1 o'clock, or when we started with current liabilities. Liabilities is transfers in the future, right? Future sacrifices of economic benefits. So we're going to have to make payments in the future. We know that $1 today and $1 tomorrow are not the same thing. So if we report the value of our liabilities today, what is the theoretically most sound way to compute the value of that liability? Right, we're going to have to make payments in the future. But we know that $1 today is not the same thing as $1 a year from now. So we're going to have to pay $1 in the future. What's the best way, theoretically, to report that on today's balance sheet? It's to compute the present value of that liability, right? It's to compute the present value of that liability. Because that's really the value today. And that is the general rule that we follow in accounting. With liabilities, record them at present value. And that's what we're doing right here. Notice that this liability, which is really a promise to pay what? 104, 8, 12, 16, 20, 124,000. We're going to pay out $124,000. But we're valuing it on the balance sheet at 94,924.76. The present value. Right? Because that's the theoretically soundest thing to do. Why don't we do this with current liabilities also? Because it's immaterial. Right? So we could, and it would be better, but the difference between the present value and the face value for current liabilities is so minimal that it's just not worth going through the trouble of doing all of this for current liabilities. But for long-term liabilities, we do. But I want you to recognize that really the best thing is to do it for all. We just invoke the materiality concept to say with current liabilities, let's not worry about that. All right, so we've recorded the issuance at time 0. Let's now go to the first interest payment. So that's June 30th, 2013. We're going to pay $4,000. So obviously we're going to credit cash for $4,000. Now this payment is for interest. So we would have to debit interest expense, right? Is interest expense also $4,000? Is it? It's not, right? How much money did we borrow?
Actually, we need to discount.
Right, so we're going to have to do something with this. So how much money did we borrow? 94, 924, 76. What is the interest rate that our lenders are charging us? 10%, or on a semi-annual basis, 5%, right? So if that's what they lent us and that's what they're charging us, what is the interest expense that we need to report? How much interest do we really owe them? 5% of 94, 924, 76, right? This is what they gave us. This is what they're charging us. So the interest that we owe them is the product of those two. 94, 924, 76 times 5%. So this times 5% is interest expense. Does everybody agree with that? All right, that's what they lent us. They're charging us 5%, so obviously that's the amount that we owe them for interest. And when we compute that, we see that that is 47, 46, 24. So they're charging us more interest than that we're paying. They're charging us more interest than that we're paying. The difference of 746.24, of course, has to be credited and goes where? To the discount, right? We credit that to the discount of note payable. And so if we look at the discount account, we started there with a balance of, we had a balance of debit 5,075.24, and now we just credited it for 746.24. So that's the carrying value. The new carrying value of our bonds is going to be what? 43.29. $43.29. I'm sorry, that's going to be the new balance in the discount. That's the new balance in the discount. After this payment, the discount is $43.29, and the book value of the bonds is, remember, bonds payable minus discount, is $100,000 minus $43.29, and that's how much? That's $95,671. $95,671. Let's look at that number for a second. What we borrowed was $94,924.76. Let me change this. 94,924.76. Then we were charged interest of $47,46.24, of which we paid only $4,000. So really, our debt to the bondholders went up by $746.24, right? Because they charged us interest of $47.46. We only paid $4,000. Well, we're not paying all the interest that we owe. The interest that we didn't pay is just going to be added to our principal. So if we take the $746.24 and add it to this, plus $746.24, what do we get? We get $95,671, right? So what I want you to recognize is that the carrying value of our bonds really just represents the amount that we owe to the bondholders between what we borrowed and interest that we've incurred but not yet paid. Yes? So, If the carrying value of the bonds represent the amount of money that we owe, then of course interest expense will always have to be computed as the product of that and the effective rate. So in the next period, when we make our next payment of $4,000, our interest expense is going to be what? It's going to be $95,671, right? Times 5%. It's going to be this times 5%. Because you accrue interest not only on principal, but also on unpaid interest. So 95,671 times 5% is how much? 4783.55. So let's jump to this amortization table. I won't write down that journal entry. You can do that yourself. We see that slowly but surely the interest expense goes up, right, for this bond. And that makes sense because you're not paying all the interest. This is what you borrowed. This is the interest that you incur. You pay less than that, so your debt to the bondholders goes up by exactly this amount. This plus that. And then in the next period, the interest expense is 4783. You pay only 4. So 783 gets added to your debt, 95,671 plus that equals that. Yeah, does everybody see that? This column here, the discount column, just keeps track of the balance in that T account, right? 5,075 minus this equals that, minus this equals that, and so on. Now, let's verify that the investors got all the money that they're entitled to. If we sum this column, you'll see that it is equal to $29,075.24. If you add that column, you'll see that it sums to $29,075.24. That is the interest that the bondholders charged Wayne Rooney, right? That's the interest that they charged Wayne Rooney. But Wayne Rooney paid only $24,000. So did the investors get all the interest that they charged? Did the investors get all the interest that they charged? It's the discount, right? How much did the investors lend Rooney? 94, 924.76. How much do they get back at the end? $100,000, right? $100,000. The difference between 100,000 and 94, 924 is, of course, exactly the difference between these two numbers. That's 5,075. So yes, the investors get their money back. They just have to wait until the end. This includes an interest payment of 5,075. Does everybody see that? So it all works out. It all works out. Any questions about amortization tables? Because these tables will show up in all these liability chapters, right? Pensions, leases, and so on. Maybe not pensions, but so many leases. Everybody okay with this? One other thing that I want to point out, notice how this book value changes. It measures the amount that we actually owe to bondholders. But remember that we also started out the chapter by saying we always want to record liabilities at their present value. This here, 98,141, is basically the present value if we're going to go right here. Right, that is right here. After the fourth payment, we have only two more $4,000 annuity payments and the $100,000 principal payment on December 31st, 2014. So on your calculator, if you didn't clear it out, just type into N now equal to 2 instead of 6. So now just put N equal to 2 and compute the present value. If you didn't clear it out, all you have to do is N equal to 2. Otherwise, enter the same thing, compute the present value, tell me what you get. $98,141. Which is exactly the amount that the accountant has recorded here in the balance sheet. So this approach for accounting for interest and amortizing a discount or a premium also results in the objective, also helps us achieve our objective of recording the liability at its present value. We constantly update the present value of that liability. Okay? All right, here, the same bonds, really. This is Cristiano Ronaldo, and I'm not going to go through this example, I'll just talk about it. The only thing that's different, again, a stated rate of 8%, same timeline, 2015. Bonds mature in December 31st, 2015. But now the market demands is 6% return. So bonds are paying 8%, market demands only 6%. Are people going to like this bond? Oh my God, that's a great looking bond. Let's go get that bond. Of course, demand is going to be high. If demand is high, what's going to happen to the price? The price is going to go up, right? So let's compute the price for this bond. All we have to do in our calculator is change the interest rate now. So put n back at 6. Change the interest rate to what? I equal to, not 5%, but 3%. Half of the 6, right? Half of the 6. I equal to 3%. If you solve for the present value, what do you get?
105.8.
I appreciate how you adjusted for the rounding error there and went straight to my notes to find the answer, Mario. Very good. You would get this. Minus plus a few pennies, right? You would get that. So if the effective rate is less than the stated rate, bonds are going to attract a lot of demand. It's going to push up the price. So here, Ronaldo issues these bonds. He's going to borrow 105, even though he's only going to pay back this, right? 105. And if that's what he gets, and the market is charging 3%, 105 times 3%, that's the interest expense. This is at 3%, right? Interest expense at 3%. 3% of this equals that. So in this example, when a bond is issued at a premium, what's happening? You're paying $4,000 even though the interest is only $31.62. Well, if you're paying more than what you're being charged in interest, what is going to be done with that excess that you paid? It's going to be applied to your principal, right? It's going to bring down your debt. So sure enough, this $837.50 that you pay in excess of the interest that you're being charged is the amount by which your debt goes down. And so the way this works out is that during the lifetime of these bonds, you're paying down your debt already to where it will be exactly equal to $100,000 when at maturity you make the final payment. Yes? Is that okay? And so, once you've recorded all your interest payments, and you come to making this last payment of $100,000, the journal entry will be what?
Credit bonds payable.
Debit bonds payable
Credit cash.
Payable, credit cash.
for $100,000, right? Everybody okay with that? All right, so those are the basic examples of bonds being issued at a discount and a premium. All right, how do we deal with partial period? So we didn't consider any interest payments that did not coincide with the financial statements date, fiscal year. If they don't coincide, we have to, of course, accrue them. So suppose when all those fiscal year end is not December 31st, but September 30th. Report the adjusting journal entry that is necessary on September 30th, 2000, in the year 203, 2013, and the payment of interest on December 31st. All right, so let's get back to our amortization table. I play soccer on Saturday morning, so my legs are now starting to stiffen up a little. Slowly and surely, the day progresses. You start to feel your exercise. I did think about you guys when I was running around. I thought, oh my God, they're already in class. I'm so lucky to be running. What's that?
You guys win?
Oh, we just play a pickup game. Doesn't matter. Let's move right along. So, September 30th. So what number do we have to look at here? This 3162 or this 3137? 3137? Yeah, because this is the number, right, that applies to the period between these two dates, right? Since June 30th. So because September 30th falls exactly in between those two dates, we're just going to take exactly half, right? Half of the so in that case, the journal entry that we report is debit interest expense. For half of that 3137, and so that is 1568.69. And then what else? Interest payable for how much? Same amount? Yeah, now it has to be 2,000, exactly half of the payment that you've got scheduled. And the other 431.31 is debited to the premium on bonds payable. And notice that that's important, right? You can't credit interest payable for the same amount because you need to update the book value of your bonds. So you need to update your premium by which you update the book value of your bonds so that when you prepare your financial statements as of September 30th, the carrying value of the bonds will be exactly equal to the present value of the remaining future capital. So this will be on September 30th, and then on December 31st, your journal entry will be what? Interest payable? How much, man? 2,000. And what else?
Interest expense.
Debit interest expense. How much? The other 1568.69. Debit premium 431.31. And credit cash for 4,000. Everybody okay with that? So that's the actual payment. Yep. All right, then bond issue costs. Oftentimes, of course, you issue bonds with the help of an investment bank. They're going to charge you something. So, football connoisseur might recognize that I made this example years ago when Rooney and Ronaldo still played together under Sir Alex Ferguson and Manchester United. Because now we're to Alex Ferguson. Issues 5 years, 7%, $250,000 bonds. Bonds sell for $273, and the investment bank charges $5,000 of issue cost. So what the bank is going to do, the investment bank, when they raise the $273, they're going to pass on how much to you? Yeah. They're not going to send you the 273 and then a bill for 5. They're just going to send you the bill for 5 and pass on 268, right? Hey, you paid your bill, $5,000. Right? That's the idea. So we're going to credit bonds payable for how much? $250, always for the face value, right? And then we credit premium for how much?
$18. No, 23.
How much for the premium? 23, 18, what?
23.
23, it has to be 23, right? Because what do you owe the bondholders? 273. And the book value of your bonds better be equal to what you owe the bondholder. And you did raise $273,000 through this bond issue. It's just that your investment bank sent you a $5,000 bill for and they just withheld those funds from the proceeds of the bond issue. So we do have $5,000 that we have to do something with.
Bond expense?
Expense? So that's always the choice that we have, right? If we incurred a cost, which we did here, we paid $5,000 for something. We either expense it or capitalize it and amortize it over time. Right? We paid $5,000 to issue these bonds. Right? You agree with that? We paid $5,000 to issue the bond. So the question is, do we just treat the $5,000 that we paid as an expense, or do we capitalize an asset and amortize it over time?
But that's 5 years bond, so it means amortizing.
So you're borrowing this money for the next 5 years, so it's really giving future economic benefits. So the cost of issuance, you say, should be capitalized and amortized over time so that we're matching with the revenues that the bonds are generating, or that the bond issuance is generating. That's your logic? I like it. I just want to make sure.
I'll see what the next one lines up.
Some people favor expensing this, you know, but we indeed capitalize and then amortize it, so we call this unamortized bond issue costs. Unamortized bond issue costs. So that's an asset. And then we amortize it. just do that straight line for the most part. So then we debit bond issue expense. And credit unamortized bond issue costs, which I'm going to abbreviate that way, since it's 5-year bonds. Straight line, that's $1,000 each year. Yes?
Mhm.
And that doesn't get involved in the application.
Say that one more time.
Just one clarification, that is nowhere in the bond application.
Right, this does not show up in the amortization table
At all.
at all. Right, in the amortization table, you're just going to work with your bond spending on premium most significantly 23. Are we doing all right?
You know, back in the day, when I first started counting, you said straight line.
Straight line amortization.
Line.
And,
When I first, that's how old I am. You counting. You had a choice, you pick either one, it was straight line. What did you do?
That's easier to do. And if the difference between straight line and effective interest is not material, we can still do. We can both materiality.
Should you have? You had to do it.
I mean, it's very rare. It's a significant sum of money off.
I'll remember that, when I get the CPA, and I'll get that question. I'm looking for reality, we'll go to straight line. Where's the shot, right?
Actually, I see that we're going to finish early. I was rushing it too much, maybe.
That's great.
Do we want to revisit any of the things that we kind of rushed through? Or do we want to just keep moving?
Plow along.
Plow along. Do we need another break or just keep going? I think we'll finish this in about 20 minutes. Just keep going. See, all of a sudden I felt very hurried. We started turning back and forth. I realized. All right. Then another item that will change the basic problem that we have been looking at is when the bond is issued between the interest rates. So when you prepare your bond issuance, you come up with your timeline, right? But you may not necessarily issue the bonds. Let me fill it out again. So when you prepare your bond issuance, you may not issue the bonds right exactly at time 0. You may not issue it until actually right there. Okay, so how do we deal with that? If you issue it between interest rates, then you're going to have carried interest. We call it carried interest. And some of you might be familiar with that too. Let's look at an example. So assume a 10-year bond issuance in the amount of $300,000 bearing 9% interest payable semi-annually. Prepare the entry to record the issue at par. So we're going to make it a little bit easy, at least on that fund. Record the issue at par on March 1st, 2007. All right. before we prepare this journal entry, let's go to the next line. Prepare the journal entry to report the interest payment on June 30th, 2013. How much are we going to pay on that day? That's my question to you. $13,500. How did you compute that, Clayton?
9% divided by 2 times 300,000.
That's right. So your face value of 300,000 multiplied with the stated rate of 9% divided by 2 because it's semi-annual gives you $13,500. Okay. So you're going to pay on this day $13,500. Remember, you have to pay this. This is what the bond contract tells you. You have to pay. That's on June 30th, 2013, which is 6 months from January 1st, 2013, which is the date on the bonds. But the bonds were actually issued on March 1st, 2013. So the interest expense that we incurred on June 30th, 2013, is that $13,500 as well? It's going to be less than that, right? How much? 9,000, 2/3 of that. Right? 13,500 is the interest that you would owe over a 6-month period, but only 4 months have gone by. So, so you're paying $4,500 more. You're paying $4,500 more than you should. So we might be tempted to say, well, why not just lower the payment penalty? Drop that from 13.5 to 9. Well, remember, we can't. We prepare these bond issuances months in advance. We've obligated ourselves to this timeline. In other words, we've obligated ourselves to paying $13,500, even if our interest expense is only $9,000. So the way we make up for that is by saying, at issuance, you know, even though the bonds are issued at par and the face value is $300,000, since we're going to pay you an extra $4,500 4 months from now, you have to pay that to us today. Okay? Because we're going to pay you $4,500 more than we should 4 months from now, and this ignores the time value of money. It's $4,500. Just again, to keep it simple. These bonds will sell with carried interest of $4,500. That's called carried interest. So instead of selling for $300,000, which is their par value, since 2 months have gone by since the last interest date, there's $4,500 of carried interest, 2 months worth of carried interest that you have to pay as well. So at the time of issuance, we still then, of course, credit bonds payable for $300,000. And now we've got $4,500 that we need to credit at issuance, and then we need to debit at the first interest payment. What do you want to call it? What seems a reasonable count? Interest payable? Accrued interest? Same thing, right? Accrued interest, interest payable? Yeah. I think that's exactly the right account title to use, because you're going to be paying $4,500 with the next interest payment that you don't really need to. So you're collecting an extra $4,500, but you recognize, I'm going to give it back to you. Never hits the income statement, it's $4,500. Just strictly balance sheet, and you're just saying, look, I'm collecting an extra $4,500, and I'm going to pay it back to you in 4 months' time. So interest payable is the account title that we use. What's that?
Literally, 9,000. 9,000, 6 months.
The 9,000 is for the other 4 months. Yeah, that's right. Any questions about bonds issued between interest rates? So obviously problems can get pretty ugly when you've got partial periods, bond issue costs, issued between interest dates. I mean, if we're introducing all those complexities into one problem, it can get difficult.
Was that a hint?
Maybe. All right. So the extinguishment of debt. So normally it's easy, right? It's debits, bond, payable, credit, cash, what we talked about before. But sometimes you'll extinguish the debt before the maturity date. Number of things you can do here. You can either buy your debt back in the open market, or maybe there is a conversion feature on the bonds, convertible bonds.
Well, I've seen sometimes when the interest rates are cheap, they just going down, well, reissue, bond, retire.
Exactly. Now, if they retire the old bonds, but you're buying them back in the open market.
No, I think, mostly, say the bond's paying 6, and if the bond, interest rates now might be 3, so they'll go do the bond issue.
Exactly. So they might have all the bonds in. Like a lot of bonds that are issued have call options associated, call options on them, which means that the issuer can just call the bonds back. Okay, has to pay a certain prearranged price. We can call the bonds for a certain price at a certain point in time. When the interest rates drop, obviously it becomes cheaper.
Refinancing your house.
It's like refinancing your house. Exactly right. It becomes cheaper to issue new debt, and so that's what companies will do. Then they'll exercise that call option, buy back the outstanding bonds, and issue new bonds to do so. All right.
Big believe on all the Republic, and we save so many million right now.
Now that's right. So if there's a difference between the reacquisition price and the net gain value of the bonds, of course there's going to be a gain or a loss. So let's look at an example. Let's look at an example. On July 1st, 2014, so this go back to our Cristiano Ronaldo example, retires the outstanding bond at 99. What does that mean? 99% of what? Of the face value, the goods on, yes. So bonds are usually quoted, bond prices are listed, quoted as a percent of the face value, right? So 100 means the bond is trading at par. If it's less than 100, it's trading at a discount. More than 100, it's trading at a premium. So you just take this as a percentage of the face value, and that will then be the price. So in this case, if they retire the bonds at 99, that means they're paying out. These were $100,000 bonds, right? These were $100,000 bonds. They're paying $99,000. So we're going to credit cash for $99,000. Credit cash for $99,000. Yes? Obviously, we're going to have the debit bonds payable for what? For the face value of $100,000. And you got to get rid of that premium, right? So this is on what day? July 1st. Now that's kind of nice because this right here after our last interest payment. So what's the premium there?
28,
28, 18, right? So the premium that we get rid of is 28, 18. Now, what if we had bought back these bonds not on July 1st, but on August 1st? What would we have had to do first? Since we got time, let's consider that all time. So what if it had not been July 1st, but August 1st?
So you would have to
One more month.
calculate that amount.
So you'd have to amortize one more month, right? So you're gonna take 1/6 of this and record what journal entry?
So interest expense there.
So 1/6 of this is what, $517, something like that?
So if we could have debit expense and credit. No, not the premium.
Yeah, the premium.
Premium?
Sure. You would take 1/6 of this, debit interest expense, and credit the premium for that amount. Credit the premium for that amount. You would have to update your premium, right? You have to bring the carrying value of those bonds to the date at which you're engaging in this transaction. So does that been August 1st? 1 month? You take 1/6 of this, $517. Or $515. Debit interest expense and credit premium. Credit premium. For the full amount. Okay? And then you take the new premium in this journal. In this case here, premium is 28, 18. So obviously we've got to credit 38, 28, 18 to what? Gain on early extinguishment of debt. Gain on extinguishment of debt. Something like that.
I don't want to confuse the past. Back in the day, I think that was considered an extraordinary item.
Is that right?
Back in
Last night they
They don't do
got
that.
rid of that.
Back in the day.
I heard you send out an email.
Yes.
I remember
Good.
back in the day, there was such a big thing, you extinguished your debt already, so you got an extraordinary.
Extraordinary item.
No more.
I've heard that, yeah.
But forget it.
No need to worry about that anymore. Why is it a gain? Can somebody explain the logic? That's, I mean,
Because
I
you got
understand that we credit gains.
Yeah, because you got an account, like you basically got an account for 105. Yeah, I believe it was 105, right? With debit cash. Yes, because originally we received 105, right? And like we basically paying out 99. And like by time like we have to amortize, like we paid some interest, so that would be the difference, no?
Yeah, so look, the book value of our liability is of course 102,828.18. This, according to our books, is our debt as of today, right? And we're paying off that debt by using only $99,000. So something that's on our books at 102,828, we can settle a debt that's on our books for almost 103, then of course, for 99, of course, we've got a gain. All right, that's good news for us. We're settling a debt with less money than it's on the books. Yes? Good. And then finally, notes payable. The logic is very similar. This comes from an old version when McNabb still played at the Eagles, and Andy Reid was still at the Eagles too. McNabb Corporation issued a 4-year, $50,000 zero interest bearing note to Reid. Zero interest bearing note. And received cash of $31,776. So that's fine too. That's just a timeline where the stated rate is 0 and there is no interest payment. Right? There's no interest payment on their timeline. Now, I don't really know if Andy Reid is a nice guy or not. Is he a nice guy? Sort of.
Personal, the word was on a personal level. He was extremely nice.
On a personal level, he was an extremely nice guy. But he did still charge McNabb 12%. I just, you know, he's not giving it away for free. He's charging interest. So he's lending him $31,776. It's a zero interest bearing note, but of course McNabb is being charged interest because what he ultimately has to pay is $50,000. Right? So at issuance, McNabb reports what? January 1st. Debit, cash. We're at $31,776, right? Oh, sorry, $31,776. And credit note payable for how much?
50K.
The $50,000. And the difference, $18,224,
The interest.
is discount, as before. And so on December 31st, this implies a 12% interest rate. We're going to record interest, but McNabb's going to record interest. And how much will that interest be?
$45, yeah.
45.56.
No?
Yeah.
6,000? No?
4,556.
45.56.
No.
No.
How much did McNabb borrow?
Well,
50.
31.
So Mario, what's the interest expense?
Times 31 times 12%.
31,776 times 12%. And how much is that?
38.13.
38.13. We'll round it to that. 38.13. Same idea, right? I mean, it's just the book value of the note. Note payable minus discount is 1850 minus 18 is 31,776 times the effective rate. 38.13. So that's the interest expense. How much is the interest payment?
That would be the 45.
Zero.
Nothing.
Zero interest bearing note, right?
This much going on.
So there's no cash payment. So the 38.13 credit is all going to be to the discount. There you go. And then next year, how would you compute interest expense?
31,776 plus 38.13 times 12%.
Very good. 31,776 plus the 38.13, right? Times 12%. Any questions? When a debt instrument is exchanged for non-cash consideration, so instead of getting cash, you issue a note for a piece of machinery, equipment, whatever it may be. then they're going to use the stated rate of interest as the effective rate of interest. It's presumed fair, so they're going to record interest expense based on the stated rate, unless there is no stated rate, or the stated rate is unreasonable, or the face amount of the debt instruments is materially different from the current cash price of consideration or the current market value of the debt instrument. Okay, so if the present value is really different from the face value, then we shouldn't. So if the stated rate is determined to be inappropriate, then you have to impute an interest rate, compute the present value. And with your calculator, you can do that. There's no formula for imputing an interest rate. No formula. Trial and error. You have to use trial and error. Okay? And the calculator will do trial and error. You may, in your college days, have used interpolation to work toward an interest rate. But on your calculator, you can just use the interest rate, solve for the interest rate. So Larry Bird issued a 4-year, $50,000, 5% note to Magic Johnson and received a computer. So this is non-cash consideration. Right? So if that computer had normally sold for $50,000, then obviously the effective rate would have been 5%, equal to the stated rate of 5%. But here we've got a computer that sells for considerably less than the face value. So obviously, the effective rate is different from the stated rate, and we have to impute it. Now, if you plugged in, what would you have to plug in? Future value is equal to what? 50,000. N equal to 4. Payment, there is an interest payment. How much? $2,500, right? 5% of 50,000. 2,500. And then present value. So these future cash flows, defined by these things here, these future cash flows supposedly equal the value of the computer. So the present value of these future cash flows needs to be equal to 39,369. Now be sure to put it minus, because one is an inflow and the other is an outflow. And if you then solve for I, what do you get?
Basically 12.
Basically 12. Rounded to 12, right? So with that calculator, you can also impute implicit interest rate. So here you solve for the interest rate that will set these future cash flows equal to a present value of 39,369. That's what that means. So in this case, what would the journal entries be? Well, you're going to credit note payable, obviously, for 50,000. What would you debit?
Cash 39,360.
Cash?
Computer equipment.
Computer equipment. Equipment. For how much? 39,369. And so there's a difference of 10,631. That is the discount, right? Discount. So this is at issuance. And then on December 31st, when we pay our interest, what's the journal? You know there was going to be credit to cash, 2,500. We computed that. Well, what's the debit to interest expense? I get 4724? Or 4724? So 39,369 times 12%, right? 39,369 times the effective rate of 12% is 4724, and so the other 2224, of course, is going to be credited to the discount. All right, let's talk about off-balance sheet financing when we talk about leases. And analysis of long-term debt, we're going to do with Professor Kim in financial statement analysis. Presentation of long-term debt, you're going to see in the case how companies present their long-term debt disclosures. There are a lot of footnote disclosures there that specify maturity dates, stated rates, effective rates, and so on. You'll see a good example of that in the case, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks. Next week is another all-day auditing day. Yes? Any questions? So you won't be able to leave for another 20 minutes, I'm sorry. Any questions about anything at all? Otherwise, you're free to go. So in 2 weeks, the case should be turned in. And I'll look at the schedule and think about a quiz. I'll think about a quiz and I'll email it to you this week, if so. But maybe you won't hear from me.
What?
Nah, I mean, there's no point in doing a quiz on bonds. I mean, the case on bonds is going to be